Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my quarterback, tight end, and defensive rankings for Week 7. We're going to kick it off with the unranked players. We have Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen on bye for the Bills and Ravens, and then Dalton Kincaid and Mark Andrews, along with Isaiah Likely and Dawson Knox, are also unranked. Brenton Strange was placed on IR. I'm not expecting David Njoku to play, so he's also unranked. And then at quarterback, Kyler Murray has returned to practice, but still limited, so it could be Jacoby Brissett instead. And then JJ McCarthy has also started to practice, but I'm not expecting him to suit up. I think he might play on Thursday against Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers, but I'm expecting Carson Wentz to get a revenge game against the Eagles off the bye. I'm also not sure about Brock Purdy yet, but he is trending towards probably playing. I did rank both Purdy and Mac Jones. So let us begin with some matchup stats first at the position, where this chart shows you every single defense, how many points they've allowed to the position. I've shown you many of these charts similar to this all year long. So if you are new to the channel, the red stats are how many points are rushing stats. And there are some matchups that are better for running quarterbacks that might be wasted on a quarterback like Tua or Stafford that might be immobile. So let's go through the list. Let's talk about the biggest upgrades at quarterback this week, where Dallas is perennially at the top of these rankings. Pretty much across the board, if you are facing Dallas at any position, you want to be starting that player. And on this graph, they are by far and away the best matchup you could find. So 24.7 points for Jayden Daniels is an expected floor. He also runs the ball quite a lot. And Terry McLaurin might come back this week. I think it'll happen. That's definitely good in the passing game. So I am 100% starting Jayden Daniels against Dallas, a must start no matter what. And then Miami, I think, gets negated because of the weather. Even though Cleveland gets a good matchup here for Dylan Gabriel, a lot of those points come on the ground, and I don't trust Gabriel to be running the ball for 50 yards or anything. So I don't think it's worth it. The wind could be as strong as 50 miles per hour in Cleveland. There's going to be a lot of rush attempts with their three-man backfield in Cleveland. I'm not starting Dylan Gabriel, even though Miami has been a good matchup. They will be falling down the list because the weather is a factor. Otherwise, the Saints are the third best matchup for Caleb Williams, so he gets a big upgrade, but DJ Moore, not 100%, may not play. That could be a limiting factor, but I would trust Caleb against New Orleans. And then the next matchup, Baltimore, is on bye. So there's actually a pretty big tier break between number 3 and number 5 on this list. And then there's a massive tier between 5 and 11. All of these teams give up between 19.1 and 18.5 points per game. So all of these quarterbacks get a relatively equal upgrade. We have Spencer Rattler against Chicago, but Rattler's getting vultured by Taysom Hill, so not expecting to trust him. Bryce Young, also an upgrade against the Jets, but it was squandered 2 weeks ago against Miami. He did capitalize against Dallas. He's not the safest bet. Stafford against the Jags, missing Puka. I don't know if it actually really helps him. I'm not dying to start Stafford without Puka Nacua. But Baker Mayfield against Detroit, I'll still start him even if Igbuka's not there. I think Evans will return. And then Aaron Rodgers did play phenomenally well against Cincinnati. That was a big upgrade against the Bengals. So I should have probably ranked him higher, but Jared Goff, also a very safe start against Tampa Bay. They are not that good on defense at stopping overall points. They have gotten into some big shootouts. So in Detroit, I like Goff. His ceiling is always higher. And then Dak against Washington probably gets into a shootout as well. That's a good matchup. Flacco was also the last upgrade in this tier. So we already saw Flacco and Rodgers play really good in fantasy. If that isn't an endorsement that these are the matchups you want, I don't know what else is. But there's also another matchup lower on this list that I think does really benefit Daniel Jones, and that would be the Chargers, who give up the most rushing stats per game to opposing quarterbacks, 7.5 on average per week. So that's split up between rushing yards and touchdowns. I think Daniel Jones probably finds the end zone on the ground, as well as runs for close to like 30-40 yards. I think Daniel Jones has a very good game against the Chargers defense. They are very injured. They've been depleted on defense, a lot of guys are on IR, and until they get back, I think the Chargers are a big upgrade for running quarterbacks and running backs. You can run a lot on the Chargers. On the opposite end of this chart, the big downgrades would be for Sam Darnold against Houston. This is by far the toughest matchup. Like 9.4 points is almost half what you're expected to get against Pittsburgh, which is the 11th best matchup. Like, this is insane. Houston is terrible, but Darnold has actually really impressed me this year. He's looked pretty good lately, so I still think he has a decent floor, but against Houston, it's a massive downgrade, so maybe you don't want to press your luck at all here. Jaxson Dart against Denver has looked good and valuable. I would like him as a backup rest of season, but yikes, this is not a spot I want to trust him. Justin Fields was atrociously bad against them in London, so Dart had 3 turnovers against New Orleans. Be my guest. I'd feel pretty good if I was going up against Jaxson Dart on my opponent's fantasy roster. But Jalen Hurts gets a terrible matchup against Minnesota. He probably overcomes, but maybe doesn't. Like, some of these bad matchups are against legit quarterbacks we're usually starting. Downgrades are pretty relevant this week. Atlanta has also been a nightmare matchup. Just ask Josh Allen last week. So whether it's Purdy or Mac Jones, some capped upside here against the Falcons. And then Tennessee, shockingly, is actually terrible to go up against in fantasy at quarterback. They give up a lot to running backs, and weather's also a factor in this game. There is some legit wind and rain that will be a factor. So Drake Maye, coming off a great performance against New Orleans, probably not as safe as you might expect. Still probably top 12 and everything, but a downgrade nonetheless at the Titans. The Raiders are also shockingly on the bottom of this list, but I'm sure the Cam Ward matchup last week does skew these numbers a little bit. I'm not going to downgrade Mahomes, though. I don't trust this downgrade. The Rams, also a pretty legit defense this year, so Trevor Lawrence, not the biggest upside this week. The Colts also kind of capped the upside for Justin Herbert, but I think he'll step up regardless. Arizona could be a problem for Jordan Love on paper, but he's had a decent floor this year, so probably not that disgusting. And then Cam Ward in some rough weather against New England. Not a safe play ever. Also, got to mention Cleveland, who's the next matchup here. At 16 points per game, that'll definitely be much lower given the wind in this game. So weather is always a problem for Tua. Not going to trust him against Cleveland. That is it for the upgrades and downgrades. Now let's move on to the rankings at the position, and let's start off up top with Jayden Daniels and Patrick Mahomes. Daniels probably has the highest upside this week because of the matchup versus Dallas. They have been a gold mine, but his wide receiver situation is a bit in flux. Debo's heel injury is a red flag, and while Terry is practicing this week, he's not a lock to play as of yet, but I do think he'll suit up. I'm not worried about it, and I do think Daniels is a lock in the lineup. He normally is. He looked much better last week off the injury. I'm much more willing to trust him, and also Dallas is the best matchup, so got to start him. He gets the biggest upgrade overall. Daniels is my number 1 quarterback. You drafted him top 3, and he will live up to that expectation, especially with Allen and Lamar on bye. At number 2, we have Patrick Mahomes versus Las Vegas, and Mahomes is the QB1 in fantasy, so I was tempted to rank him above Daniels here, but the Raiders matchup somehow is a downgrade on paper. I'm not worried, though. He gets Rashee Rice back in a game against Las Vegas. They probably bring out the ring around the rosy play and really dominate the Raiders, really embarrass them, empty the playbook a little bit, show off some trick plays, and showcase Mahomes as a potential MVP yet again. He's looking amazing. I would be worried to face off against the Chiefs rest of season, but not worried against the Raiders. He probably throws 4 touchdowns this week. Got to start Mahomes, but I don't think he has to run it as much against Las Vegas. That's why I do have Daniels ranked above. I think Daniels offers more rushing stats against the Cowboys. At number 3, we're dropping down a tier, but these guys are must starts this week in my opinion. I have Dak Prescott versus Washington, and Dak does not run as much as Daniels either, but he's offered some elite ceiling games, and this could easily be one of those 30-point performances again. With CeeDee Lamb expected to return, there's no hesitation. Dak needs to be in the lineup. The Commanders have also been a positive matchup this season, so not going to worry about it. Top 10 matchup here. Division games can be weird sometimes, but at home with that terrible defense, he will play well. He will continue to build his case for MVP. Dak is a must start against Washington. Another MVP candidate is Baker Mayfield, who will probably maintain the lead in that category. I think it's a big shootout, and even if he loses, Baker will put up great fantasy points against Detroit. But I picked them to win. I don't want to bet against Baker right now, so definitely not going to fade him in fantasy. Even with Ibuka going down, I think Evans will return. So that offers a legit wide receiver to throw to. I think Shepard can also step up. Otton has also played well, and Rachaad White can also catch a lot of passes. I trust Baker. I think Detroit forces them to drop at least 30, 35 points in this matchup. Love the upside in this shootout. At number 5, I'm going to go Jalen Hurts at Minnesota. Always a must start. You can't fade him too much, but this is a rough matchup. It does rank bottom 3 against the Vikings. They are off a bye as well, and they limit opposing wide receivers like no one else. They are the toughest spot for A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, but they are vulnerable against the tight end position, and you can run on them a decent amount. So Hurts is going to run a lot in this one. They have to get back to their identity. They lost 2 games in a row. They don't want to lose a third. I picked Wentz to win, but I do think it's a shootout, not a low-scoring game. So I will trust Hurts from a fantasy standpoint. I'm expecting a tush-push touchdown, and he can probably give you at least 40, 50 rushing yards against the Vikings. I think he needs to. So he'll step up. I think just like the Giants game, he'll give you 20 points easily, but he may not go over 22. The Vikings are a tough spot. So top 5 quarterback every week. Got to trust him, but he has been fading a little bit. Got to acknowledge the upside's not as high as we thought when we drafted him. At number 6, I'm going Jared Goff versus Tampa Bay. And although there is always some risk with Goff, he can get vultured on the goal line or sometimes catch a reception that gets negated. I love him when he plays at home. His upside is just so much higher in indoor games, especially with the crowd on his side. And this Bucs matchup is not scary. They have been a plus matchup, top 9 in fantasy against quarterbacks. So I think this is a big upgrade. They lost last week. They need to bounce back. And I don't think you can run very easily on Tampa. They will score a lot of points. It will come in the passing game. Goff is going to throw at least 3 touchdowns, in my opinion. And at home, he usually averages well over 20 points. So I think he's a must start. Love this spot. In primetime, give me the Lions offense to look prolific. And they probably win the game, but I did pick Tampa. They'll have to keep up with Baker regardless of who's healthy on the field. So I like Jared Goff. His secondary is also depleted with injuries and suspensions. He has to play well. I think he will. I like Jared Goff, top 6 in week 7. Below Jared Goff, I think we're dropping down a tier, and there is a little bit more risk involved in general, but I do trust Caleb Williams. I believe Caleb has earned top 12 rankings every week. Even in bad matchups, I still think he has a high enough floor with the rushing upside where you're not going to fade him. He's really good. Ben Johnson's offense is always pretty prolific, and I just don't see a reason to be fading him. The Saints rank as a top 3 matchup on paper. They allow over 20 points per game on average. Caleb should exploit that. Even though DJ Moore is not a lock to play, he did check himself into the hospital, and I don't think he practiced on Wednesday or Thursday. So perhaps Luther Burden and Colston Loveland have to step up, and that will cap the upside a bit, but the Saints don't scare me. Caleb has a good offense. I like Caleb Williams as a top 10 start. At number 7, I would keep him in the lineup. At number 8, we have Justin Herbert against the Colts, and I see a back and forth shootout here. I know the Colts, I did mention them as a downgrade bottom 10 matchup, but I just kind of don't care. I am going to this game, so personal bias maybe factors in. Perhaps I'm just being hopefully optimistic here, but I do think Herbert has a very good passing game to keep up with Jonathan Taylor, who probably drops a couple house calls. I worry about the Chargers defense in this game. So I think it's a high scoring game. I don't think the Colts defense is that scary. I mean, Jacoby Brissett kept that game interesting. Herbert looks unguardable, He was a nightmare to tackle against the Dolphins last week. And just like Dak Prescott and Baker Mayfield, he is also in the MVP discussion. So if not for his offensive line being hurt, I would probably rank him top 5, honestly. I think he could be better than Hurts and Goff and Caleb this week. But at number 8, with a significant downgrade, I still think you're starting him. In the top 10, I would endorse Herbert. I have to decide between Herbert and Maye. And as you can see, I have Maye 2 spots lower. I am starting Herbert in my Blunt League roster over Drake Maye. I'm not worried about the weather in the dome game. Herbert should be okay, but there is some risk with the offensive line situation. He may not have much time to throw, but I'm hopeful Quentin Johnston plays, and with that, there's some added upside. I think he throws 3 touchdowns. I don't trust the run game to be that effective, so he can run it himself. I like Herbert's floor. I think he's a top 10 play against the Colts. But I also trust Daniel Jones in the same game to be a top 10 play. But I do think Jonathan Taylor will be on display, and that will limit some of the upside for Daniel Jones. If you told me 2 or 3 touchdowns go on the ground, it could really cap his upside. So I trust the floor. He's been a good start this season. And I also mentioned the Chargers give up a lot of points to running quarterbacks. Jones can exploit that. He has tremendously high upside. I would be starting him with confidence, but I do think Herbert in this game will have slightly better fantasy production because he won't get vultured by Jonathan Taylor multiple times. Daniel Jones, though, is top 10. I would start him against the LA Chargers. I'm also going to start Drake Maye at number 10 on the road at Tennessee, but I am worried about the weather in this matchup. I do downgrade Drake Maye because of that. And then on paper, the Titans are also a rough spot. Shockingly, they do rank bottom 5 in terms of fantasy matchups this year. So you can run on them very easily. If they do get up big and the weather really is that bad, I could see them kind of just kill the clock and not really force the issue down the field like they did against the Saints in the first half last week. And for whatever reason, in the second half, Drake Maye didn't do very much against New Orleans. It was a much worse offense in the second half against New Orleans last week. So that could happen again against Tennessee. They've actually been good at stopping fantasy quarterbacks. I think the weather's the main concern, though. I still have him at 10. He has a lot of high upside, and his ceiling performances have been phenomenal. So due to the circumstances, I think that ceiling is capped, but the floor remains pretty productive. I think he's a top 10 play. I would probably start him, but I do have Herbert in the lineup above him personally. At number 11, we're dropping down a tier, and these are my streamers for week 7. Outside the top 10, it's not a lock to be in the lineup. In a typical 10-team league, you may not have the space, but perhaps you need to replace Lamar or Allen on bye, and perhaps you will have some faith in the Carson Wentz revenge narrative. I think without Quinyon Mitchell, there is no reason for concern. The Eagles' defense is pretty injured, and especially if Jalen Carter doesn't play, then it could just be as good as Jaxson Dart in this matchup. I do see a lot of upside. Carson Wentz has been slinging it as the starter for Minnesota. So we know Justin Jefferson is elite, and I don't think anyone can stop him. Without Quinyon Mitchell, there's just no big concern in the secondary. The Eagles' defense has not been anywhere near as good this year as it was the previous season. So not a big fade. I think Jefferson's popping off. I also think Addison can have a really good game here. However, there is the risk that Jordan Mason does dominate. The Eagles are also having a problem stopping the run. Just ask Cam Scatterbo. But Carson Wentz in this revenge game off the bye, I'm going to trust Kevin O'Connell. I see a 300-yard performance in the cards for Carson Wentz. I would consider him one of the highest upside streaming options off the waiver wire. There are some weird matchups for otherwise good quarterbacks, and it gets pretty dicey moving forward. I think Wentz at 11 has very underrated value off the waiver wire. He's my favorite plug and play this week. At number 12, I have Jordan Love at Arizona. Love can always relinquish the touchdowns to Josh Jacobs as well, but Arizona's actually decently good at stopping fantasy quarterbacks. So he's had a decent floor, but also a bit up and down. In a dome game, however, I could see the offense really teeing off, but they haven't been consistent. They're still a young team, still trying to find their rhythm, and they don't know how to close out opponents when they have the lead that well. So I could see the offense sputter. I could see him hand it off a lot, but he runs it enough where it does factor in, keeps the floor high. I think in the streaming conversation, he's always going to hover in like 10 to 15 most weeks. But against Arizona, it's not my favorite matchup. You could do better. That's why I'd rather go Wentz. I fear Philly less than the Cardinals. At 13, it's a tie between Brock Purdy and Mac Jones. So whoever gets the start will be ranked exactly here at 13, regardless of who's on the field. I don't see the equation changing very much for the Shanahan Niners quarterback, regardless of who it is. Purdy does run it a little bit more, but with the toe injury, probably doesn't push it. And there's also still a chance that Mac Jones is the starter. Against Atlanta, it's a terrible matchup, though. They've been top 4 at stopping opposing quarterbacks, so not dying to force it. But it's just the system that they play in. The floor is always high, and I expect at least 250, 275 passing yards from the Niners quarterback. If Kittle returns, that also offers an extra touchdown, perhaps. But Tonjes had been contributing as well. I don't think it changes very much, regardless of who's the quarterback. The Falcons are a matchup that scares me. So I think in the streaming conversation, it's fine to start him. But at 13, I think the upside's a bit capped this week. I could see them being outscored easily by Flacco and Rodgers. I don't think it's the best spot for San Francisco's quarterback. Whoever that is, they will be number 13 in my ranks, and you don't have to start QB 13 in a one quarterback league. At number 14, I think Michael Penix in the same game also offers some upside. I'm hopeful that Darnell Mooney returns, but I do think in a better matchup for Kyle Pitts, he can contribute. And I do think Penix will have at least 1, if not 2, touchdowns this week, because London looked amazing. Bijan also catches passes. He has some high upside, but he has been up and down a bit inconsistent. I don't fear this matchup, though, at all. They're so depleted on defense. In primetime, I think Penix does step up. I think at least 16, 17, 18 points is a fair projection on Michael Penix. Somewhere around 17 is what I'm expecting. I also think that's the same range of outcomes for Bo Nix versus the Giants. He's been really inconsistent this year, but has offered some elite upside. And at the end of the day, the Giants don't scare you that much. Sean Payton's offense will inevitably click, but Nix has not run the ball as much. He's also not throwing it deep down the field very well. So there is some major limitations here. He does have capped upside, but the floor I think is high enough to trust Sean Payton. The offense I doubt will sputter against the Giants like it did in London against the Jets. I'm willing to believe it was just the London situation. Playing at home, I think they'll bounce back. Beyond this point, though, I think I'd rather be benching pretty much everyone. I don't trust them unless it's a 2-quarterback league, and even then, there are some rough matchups here that have me worried. But Sam Darnold has been safe enough this season. I think he's looking good enough where I'm willing to consider him a decent floor play, even against the Houston Texans, who are the worst matchup, give up less than 10 points per game to opposing quarterbacks on average. This could be a terrible call. I could see him totally burn you, but he has been good enough. I think JSN is matchup proof, and I do think they will start to win at home inevitably. Give me Darnold versus Houston as a decent super flex option, but at 16, definitely not starting him in a typical one quarterback league. The Texans are the worst matchup, and Denver is the second worst matchup, so not excited to trust Jaxson Dart, but his rushing value is just so enticing. He has a lot of value rest of season. I would want to have him as a backup. If I was desperate off the wire and picked him up recently, I would not drop him. I'm not dying to start him, but it's just the matchup. In better matchups, he'll have way higher value, and I will rank him higher. So that's why I am still considering him top 20. The floor with the rushing stats is legit. If he runs for 50 yards and a rushing touchdown, don't be shocked. That'll definitely pad the numbers. And even if he has 3 turnovers, you could still get a decent game out of Jaxson Dart, but not dying to push it. Not my favorite play. Feels very risky at the Broncos. Joe Flacco also felt a bit too risky to rank higher, but I did have him in the top 20. That's definitely an endorsement in Superflex formats, and I did pick him up in that primetime Palooza DFS draft. I'm happy I got the stack with him, Fant, and Higgins. I still have Bijan, Brian Thomas Jr., and Tutu Atwell, and the roster is already making money. So I am hopeful, but we will see what happens. Flacco had a very good game with 3 touchdowns. Against Pittsburgh, it was a top 12 matchup. So I want to be trusting the positive matchups. Technically, Stafford gets a top 10 matchup as well, but without Puka Nacua, I just don't see the same value here. I could see them hand it off to Kyron a lot, and I could also see them try to win on defense like they did against Baltimore. We thought last week would be amazing, but with Puka going down, Stafford was pretty dog shit. He really let me down, and now I'm panicking. I'm not going to trust him after last week's low floor. He's without Puka. It's really critical to his ceiling. The passing stats are critical. He does not run the ball. So Jacksonville, I think, could be a problem, but in this game I see a pretty low score on both sides, so that's why I'm not dying to start Trevor Lawrence either. But he has had a decent floor for a few weeks now, so I could understand it in a Superflex format, but given both guys have a bye next week, you could be dropping them just because you need the space. I don't hate that option either. At 19 and 20, you definitely shouldn't start them in a 1-quarterback league, but Stafford is a good backup. I would want him rest of season on the roster. Bryce Young is below the tier break, though, where you're 100% benching these players. I'm not neutral anymore outside the top 20. No fucking chance. I'll start him. But the Jets are a good matchup. On paper, you should be upgrading him. But he did not capitalize against Miami. He didn't even crack 20 points against Dallas last week. Against the Jets, I could see him struggle, especially with Chuba Hubbard coming back. They might just run it 45 times with Hubbard and Rico Dowdle. I don't like this matchup for Tet McMillan. I will bench Bryce Young despite an upgrade. Number 22, Aaron Rodgers at Cincinnati was not ranked high enough. Had 4 touchdown passes. Pretty amazing there. But the Bengals are a good matchup. Should have seen it coming. I could have ranked him higher, but I chose not to. I did rank Flacco 4 spots above him. At 23, Stroud, I still don't trust, but did have some upside against Baltimore. We'll see if it clicks off the bye, though. Until he proves it against a good defense, I don't trust him. But this is a good test. If the rookie wide receivers can step up and Schultz is as good as I'm expecting, then there is value for Stroud rest of the year. But in this matchup, no thanks. Primetime at Seattle, not my favorite spot. But off the bye, it is possible he does start to look good. Justin Fields was atrocious against Denver. And without Garrett Wilson, I think the offense will struggle again. So I will pass on Garrett Wilson. I'm not going to press my luck with a possible less than 100 yards passing from Fields. Even if he has 80 yards and a rushing touchdown, you could still get burned with multiple turnovers. I don't think he is a lock to go over 10 points, but he does have tremendous upside until Wilson comes back. I'm not going to trust him in the lineup. 25 through 30, I'm definitely benching all of these quarterbacks, though. It could be Kyler Murray, but if it's Brissett, no thanks. I think it's going to be Brissett, but I could be wrong. I think Call of Duty is calling Kyler off the field. Number 26, Spencer Rattler at Chicago. An upgrade on paper, but does get vultured by Taysom Hill. Not enough touchdowns to trust him. No thanks here. Cam Ward at some point will look decent, but with no Ridley against the Patriots in bad weather, not going to take that chance. And then Geno probably has 3 turnovers, might give Pete Carroll the idea to trade for Jameis Winston and have to settle on Russell Wilson after the Giants refuse to pass on Winston. And I do not trust Geno Smith against the Chiefs. Lastly, the weather in Cleveland is atrocious this week, so not going to start either Dylan Gabriel or Tua. I think you are totally out of your mind if you're starting one of them in the rain and wind. You are asking to lose with a Browns or Dolphins quarterback in week 7. That's it for the quarterback rankings. Now let's talk about the tight end position. These are the matchups for the position, and I am trusting some of these stats, especially given 1 and 2 gave us 5 tight end touchdowns on Thursday night. The best matchups were Pittsburgh and Cincinnati, and I did not rank Fant or Jonnu or Freiermuth high enough. Even Darnell Washington did catch a touchdown. So this is definitely an indication to believe some of these stats, especially for tight ends. You want to start them against Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. But on Thursday, if you didn't capitalize in time, you're shit out of luck. There are still some good matchups, though. The third best matchup would be Carolina going up against Mason Taylor. Without Garrett Wilson, I do think Taylor can capitalize, but he really let you down last week. There was a rough performance there. But Carolina should have the same problems as they have had all year. They allow the most tight end receiving yards per game, an average of 74, along with several touchdowns. The gap is pretty big. The gap between red and blue usually just represents how many touchdown points are coming. It's pretty high, the odds of Taylor to find the end zone against the Panthers. So he might be a good streaming option this week, but last week totally let you down. You might not trust him. And then at number 4, Green Bay is a elite spot here for Trey McBride. McBride's going to dominate as always, especially if Harrison is out with a concussion. I do not trust the Packers to stop him. So he's always a must start. McBride will be a lock in the lineup. But I'm sadly not going to endorse Harold Fannin despite a big upgrade against the Dolphins. It's a great matchup here. They allow the 5th most points to the position, but the weather is just so gross. I do not want to start a pass catcher for the Browns or Dolphins in this game. So no thanks on Fannin, despite some increased value with Njoku probably not going to play, and that's a bummer, but Fannin, not going to trust him. Arizona, though, is a very good matchup for Tucker Kraft. He's always in the lineup, so really good spot for him. He'll have an elite ceiling against the Cardinals. And then it starts to even out, but these next 5 or 6 teams are all in a very similar tier and do give up more than 11.4 points per game. So Seattle is a great spot for Dalton Schultz. I mentioned him as an upgrade in the start sit video on Tuesday. One of my favorite streamers. The Seahawks allow a lot of touchdowns and yards to the position. New Orleans also gives up a lot of points, but Colston Loveland and Cole Kmet not safe enough in Chicago. But if DJ Moore doesn't play, perhaps they can capitalize. In Baltimore, they are on bye, so that is a non-factor. Minnesota is a good spot for Dallas Goedert. He's earned your trust. I'm definitely starting Dallas Goedert this week. New Orleans against Chigokonkwo has some weather to deal with, so not dying to trust him, but Okonkwo with Ridley out might have a very good game, perhaps. And then lastly, Tampa Bay is pretty vulnerable. Sam Laporta also gets an upgrade. The gap between yards and points is pretty big. I think a touchdown is a pretty safe bet for Laporta in week 7. On the opposite end of this chart, beyond the average tier between 10 and 9 points, we do have some like steep decline once you enter the bottom 10. They are like significantly worse as you go down the list. And the worst one would be Atlanta. They get George Kittle and the Niners this week, so perhaps you don't give a shit. But they did give up a touchdown last week to Dawson Knox. On the year, though, less than 4 points per game allowed on average. So I'm still going to trust Kittle if I have him. I've been waiting a long time. I'll probably still start him. But he does get the worst matchup you could find against the Falcons. The second toughest matchup is on bye. The Bills are unavailable, so thankfully we don't have to worry about them. But then the Eagles get TJ Hawkinson, and I'm definitely not going to trust TJ Hawkinson. As much as I'm willing to trust good matchups, I'm also trusting the bad ones, and Hawkinson has been way too up and down. I think this is a good game for Addison and Jefferson, but I'm not going to trust TJ Hawkinson. No fucking chance. These next 3 are all in a basically identical tier, 6.6 and 6.7 points per game allowed. We have Denver against Theo Johnson. Probably not going to trust him. Kansas City against Brock Bowers. If he plays, I'll probably start him, but if it's Michael Mayer, doubt it. And then Houston against AJ Barner and Elijah Arroyo. Barner has been scoring touchdowns, but did get shut down in a rough matchup last week. I think I will fade AJ Barner, not bold enough to pick him up and start him off the waiver wire in a bad matchup. Last 2 to bring up would be the Chargers at 8.1 points per game. So Tyler Warren might look better, but could step up. Oh, I did skip Las Vegas at 7.5. Las Vegas against Kelce is technically a bad spot, but they do give up 45 yards per game. Kelce probably scores a touchdown as well. I don't think he goes away. I'm still probably considering Kelce a top 10 play. And then lastly, Cleveland at 8.8 points is a tough spot in general, but with the weather, I'm not going to trust Darren Waller. I would be very worried to go against the rain and wind with a Dolphins pass catcher in Cleveland this week. Tua, not the same quarterback in bad weather. So that's it for the matchup stats. Now let me pull up my rankings, where number 1, I'm going to go with Trey McBride versus Green Bay. And at number 2 in the same game, I have Tucker Kraft. I brought it up 2 top 6 matchups, and given the other matchups in the top 4 are all against like weird tight ends you don't really trust or have bad weather like Miami, I am not going to force it. I'm going to just trust that these two have the biggest upgrades on paper for relevant tight ends in your lineup. Everyone rosters them in every league. They're not available, and you definitely want them in the lineup. They are typically bust proof, and this week I think a touchdown will be available. I think it's a tight end showcase back and forth, and McBride gets a better matchup. He usually gets more targets. I will go McBride as the tight end 1 this week. I like the matchup. I also prefer him with Brissett under center. And if Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't play, even if it's Kyler, I think a touchdown is likely. But Kraft doesn't get as much volume, so the floor is slightly lower, but the ceiling could be higher. You could tell me Kraft scores more touchdowns than McBride and definitely has the better game. So both of those two are elite, cannot bench them. And at 3 and 4, I'm also not going to bench Tyler Warren or Dallas Goedert, but the matchups are nowhere near as ideal. So Tyler Warren has looked bust proof, but I'm not convinced he's as matchup proof as McBride yet, so I will rank him at 3. At 3, though, you're not benching him. He's been phenomenal. I'm not worried that the Chargers actually shut him down, but it is a bottom 10 matchup. Perhaps I am underestimating how difficult it is. The Dallas Goedert ranking, though, I think is probably going to stay in the top 6 or 7 all year. Like, Goedert has been so consistent. He feels like the safest fantasy option to trust in Philadelphia. That is saying a lot, but Saquon has not lived up to the draft day expectations. Hurts is probably safer, but A.J. Brown is not a lock in the lineup, and neither is Devontae Smith. Goedert has been way more relied upon, and that's a big sign that the offensive coordinator is not taking advantage of this offense's potential. So I don't think things are going to change. I think Goedert is the go-to option, especially for touchdowns. I trust him the most. And at tight end, that's so valuable. I would keep starting him. He looks so good against the Giants. I think he'll look really good against the Vikings. It is a top 10 matchup. I did mention a legit upgrade for Goedert at Minnesota. They are great at stopping wide receivers, but not tight ends. So if there's one player I want to trust in the passing game for the Eagles this week, it is Goedert in the top 4, a must start. But at 5 and 6, you've been waiting for them to come back. I think they are also must starts. Brock Bowers and George Kittle are not locks to play yet. We need to make sure they are healthy. But if they are, there's no way you're benching him. If he plays, you're starting him. That is the mantra for this tier of 2. You've been disappointed with spending such a big draft day price to get them, but you know that when they come back to the lineup, they have such high value. They can still win you the league like you were hoping. So it's positive news to see Kittle practicing. Bowers probably was being saved for this Chiefs game anyways, so I think he'll return, but it's not a guarantee yet. I'll update you on Saturday when we get the final injury reports, but at least with Kittle, you'll know for sure if he suits up if they activate him off of IR. If they're not going to let him play, then they'll keep him on IR and have an extra roster spot open for someone else. So that'll be a big indicator. With Bowers, it's likely a game time decision, but I am hopeful that both guys play. If they don't, their backups have top 20 value, so you could look to them if the waiver wire is really competitive in your league. But I do think Bowers and Kittle will be top 6 options in their first week back, though. They're probably not the most elite plays. And also, it is a rough matchup for both. The Falcons are the worst matchup on the slate across the board, so Kittle may not play well at all. And then Bowers does get a bottom 5 matchup against the Chiefs. It is not an upgrade by any stretch. So with the injury lingering, could limit them as well. I hate the matchup. I will be still starting Bowers and Kittle, though, despite that downgrade. At 5 and 6, they are lower. I thought I would rank them in the top 3. I did not, coming off of their injuries. At 7, 8, and 9, I think we're dropping down a tier, but all 3 guys, I think, have earned a start in your lineup. Laporta has a very good shot at a touchdown this week. It is a top 12 matchup for him against Tampa Bay. So they have given up a lot of touchdowns. I think Goff plays exceptionally well in the dome indoors, and I do expect Laporta to continue to be a top 10 tight end option every week. I think he's earned the right to stay in the lineup. We drafted him top 4, and maybe he's not that good, but he's definitely a good start most of the time. At number 8, I have Travis Kelce versus Las Vegas, and the return of Rashee Rice might take away some of the spotlight, but I do think Mahomes is going to dominate against the Raiders. I expect at least 3, maybe 4 plus touchdowns from Mahomes this week, so Kelce is probably going to get one of them, and he can also still offer you 75 plus yards. Will he give you that? Maybe not, but I do think a touchdown is coming for Kelce. I'm not going to worry about Las Vegas, despite on paper being a bad matchup. They are bottom 10 in points allowed, but I don't give a shit. I think the touchdown looks like a safe bet for Mahomes this week. Number 9, I have Jake Ferguson, who definitely loses value now that Lamb comes back to the lineup, but he has earned your trust. He's looked very good, very competent, but Pickens, I think, has also overtaken him, so now you're just kind of back to touchdown desperation, but I think even without it, the floor remains high. I could still see like 6-7 targets on average for Ferguson every week, and with Dak, that's probably going to lead to a lot of red zone targets that lead to touchdowns. I think Ferguson is still a top 10 tight end for now, but he might be fading. It might be more like a top 15 streamer most of the time if Lamb really does crater his value. It was nice while it lasted, but Ferguson is not going to remain a top 3 tight end rest of season. At number 9, though, I'll still start him in my lineup. At number 10, though, we're dropping down a tier, and now we are firmly in the streaming conversation. And given Bowers and Kittle are not a lock to play, it's possible you are looking at my tight end 8 on the week. It's unlikely, but it is possible, and that is Dalton Schultz. In my opinion, he's a very safe start this week. He's been pretty consistent, 3 straight games with 6 targets and 5 catches. Last time we saw him, he did have 60 yards against Baltimore. So it's possible he has that level upside yet again. The Seahawks matchup does rank top 7 against the position. They do allow just shy of 12 points per game. So I see a very high floor. I know most people are sleeping on him. I barely considered him on the radar before the bye week. I was definitely sleeping on Schultz. I should have been ranking him much higher, but he is very available on the waiver wire. He is only rostered in 16% on ESPN, and if you want to just stream the position every week, I would look to Schultz in this matchup. He's past his bye, so you won't have to drop him if he sustains streaming value. That could definitely be a good pickup for you rest of season. And I would assume their corners start to get healthier. That could limit Nico Collins a little bit, and I don't trust the rookie wide receivers quite yet. So he is the number 2 target for CJ Stroud so far, and that has led to a decent floor every week. I think he is bust proof in a positive matchup. I would expect at least 50 yards for Dalton Schultz this week. I think the volume is safe enough to project 6 targets and close to 5 catches. I think he'll be a good safe play against Seattle. A good matchup. He is my favorite streaming option on the week, but he's mainly a floor play. I'm mainly looking at a bust proof selection for this ranking, and that's why he's at the top of this tier. I think he is the safest non-bust play for at least 7 points. That is my projection from a floor standpoint on Schultz in this matchup. At number 11, though, if you're chasing a bit more upside, I could understand rostering Cade Otton instead. I have liked him as a streamer the last few games, and given the injury to Igbuka, that's yet another mouth that is not going to compete with him for those touchdowns. So he has yet to score a touchdown this year, and the volume has not quite been as high as Dalton Schultz, but last 2 games he does have 11 targets, and the yardage has been pretty solid. So he can also have a decent path for 10 plus points. He is rostered in 25% of leagues, so he is more coveted than Dalton Schultz, but I have them in the same conversation. So same tier, it's up to you. Take your preference, but I think this slightly safer play with a few more targets more likely would be Schultz. Otton is right there with him though. At number 11, I would still consider him a top 12 start in week 7. At number 12, I'm also considering Zach Ertz as a top 12 start. I expect Terry to return, but Debo isn't 100%. And the Cowboys are just such a good matchup. I see a lot of points for Jayden Daniels against the Cowboys. So I want to be starting pieces in this matchup. I see a lot of offense, and a touchdown is somewhat reliable for Ertz. He will burn you without it, though. He did burn me really bad when he played the Chargers and only had 1 catch. but he definitely can offer you 12 points with a touchdown. I could see a big performance from Ertz, especially if Debo is not healthy. That could be a problem. But I do think Terry's return caps his upside. I'm also worried that the wind and weather in Tennessee caps the upside for Hunter Henry, but not the biggest weather concern on the week, so not as massive of a downgrade. I want to rank him top 10, honestly. The matchup doesn't scare me. I think he could have a big bounce back. Drake Maye looked great last week, and Hunter Henry does score touchdowns. So he's a legit option as well. I would not drop him. I think he has top 12 value rest of season, most likely. But at 13 this week, I could see him offer little upside as well. Last week was disappointing, and the weather is a problem, so not my favorite start, but you could do much worse than Hunter Henry. At 14, Evan Engram is also decent floor play. He does have good volume last 2 games. Since returning from injury, the target share is looking like he's the second best option for Bo Nix. So that's going to offer him about a 4-catch, 40-yard floor every week. 6-7 points is probably the floor for Evan Engram most weeks. And occasionally he'll find the end zone. It could happen against the Giants. If it does, you'll be really happy. Dallas Goedert had tremendous upside last week against New York. So he's a safe backup tight end to roster. I would understand not dropping Engram for Schultz, but I don't see the highest upside for Engram in general. The Broncos offense is a little bit up and down. I might fade him. The matchup is not a massive upgrade. It's just average overall. At 15, I have Kyle Pitts at the Niners, and he was gross last week, but honestly, I'd blame the matchup more than the player. The Bills are the second toughest spot to go up against. So that's where I think he could bounce back against the Niners, but I still expect him to let you down at some point or other. Kyle Pitts is not the safest option in general, but if Mooney stays off the field in a better matchup, I could see him step up a little bit better. I don't think touchdowns are safe to bet on, though, and that's why, just from a floor standpoint, Pitts is in the low end of this tier, but could still get you about 6 or 7 points, just like Engram or Schultz, pretty reliably. Tyler Higbee, last guy in this tier, did score a touchdown last weekend. With Puka out, there will be opportunities available. I could see it work out again. There's a decent shot for him to find 10 points again, but he needs a touchdown, and Stafford at Jacksonville could be a weird game in London. I think I'm going to pass, given he'll be on bye. You can't really roster him after this week. It's just a 1-week fill-in. That's why I'd rather go Schultz. He's at least past the bye, and if he does play well, you might be able to hang on to him for a long time and never have to cut him. But this tier is all kind of the same. If you want to put any player among these 7 at the top, where I have Dalton Schultz at number 10, be my guest. It's all kind of a grab bag of options. Tight end is always like this. And literally, there's still another 6 options I think have legit value as well. This next tier also could be great in fantasy. But Harold Fannin and Darren Waller get so much bad weather, I gotta fade them. I want to roster them rest of season. I think they are valuable tight ends. But without a touchdown, you will get screwed. And given the bad weather, I don't see a lot of pass attempts. I think both quarterbacks will throw it less than 20 times, maybe even less than 12. So no thanks with them. Need a touchdown. You might get bailed out, but just like Waller last week, even if it does, you probably don't go over 10 points with not much volume. At 19 and 20, I did tell you that Noah Fant and Johnny Smith had good matchups. They did have flex appeal, but I wasn't bold enough to rank them any higher. They did have massive risk as well. It paid off if you were bold enough to start them, good for you, but they were mainly DFS options, not really safe in season long. And I think after last week, it's also really hard to trust Mason Taylor and Theo Johnson, but I will admit, I feel like I'm ranking Mason Taylor 10 spots too low, perhaps. The Panthers matchup is top 3, and without Garrett Wilson, it's either going to be a terrible offense that can't move the ball at all, or Mason Taylor is going to have double-digit targets. It's one or the other, no in between, and that's where I'm not bold enough to endorse him. I could be like literally 10 ranks too low. I fear I am far too low on Mason Taylor at 21, but didn't trust him enough. After last week, it feels like it could burn you. And same with Theo Johnson, but Theo actually has a terrible matchup. It's actually bottom 4 for Theo Johnson. It is top 3 for Mason Taylor. So that I probably want to change. Yeah, I'm going to pull him up up to number 14 over Evan Engram, right behind Hunter Henry. I will adjust it at the end of the video in the final version on the ranks. But as I'm recording, I don't want to go back and change it. Mason Taylor is moving up 7 spots in the ranks. It feels like he's too low here at 21. 22, Theo Johnson, not going to trust him after last week, but could score a touchdown against Denver. Bad matchup, not going to force him in if I don't have to. And then these next 4 guys also have some roster appeal, but bad matchups this week. I'm going to bench A.J. Barner versus Houston. Just doesn't feel worthy of a pickup, but has scored touchdowns this year. Gadsden has 2 games with over 7 targets, but it has correlated with other guys getting hurt. Last week, Quentin Johnson didn't play, so not going to trust Gadsden with QJ probably coming back. And then Okonkwo gets a good matchup, but the weather's a factor. He could be great, though, without Calvin Ridley. TJ Hawkinson, terrible matchup for him. I will bench Hawkinson. No doubt about it. Not going to trust him. I also have Taysom Hill, Pat Freiermuth, Juwan Johnson, and Jatavian Sanders in the top 30. And then Mayer, Jake Tonjes would be more valuable if Bowers and Kittle don't play, but it's only 1 week, so not going to trust them. And Loveland at 33, at some point, will inevitably pop off. He's talented enough, but too unproven. He's just not ready at this point. So that's the tight end position. Now let's wrap up the video with defensive rankings. And at number 1, I'm definitely starting the Chiefs versus Las Vegas. Geno Smith has so many interceptions this year, turnover prone like crazy. I expect a full-blown rout of the Raiders. The Chiefs will put on a clinic, a must start this week. My number 1 defense is the Chiefs. But the Browns get the weather advantage versus Miami. Tua also turns it over like crazy, but the wind and rain is going to cap all of the Dolphins' offense. I don't see more than 12 points on the board for Miami. Give me the Browns as a top 2 play. I thought they were going to be top 10 entering the week, and then the weather just cemented it. They are a must start versus the Dolphins. The Patriots at Tennessee also benefit from bad weather, so they're a lock. Especially in the Vrabel revenge game, they should play really well. But sometimes interim coaches get a big bump and the team plays really well for them. I doubt it happens here, though. I'm going to trust Mike Vrabel and the Patriots defense. Number 4, I think we're dropping down a tier. It's not as elite, but still probably worth a start. Very reliable floor plays, in my opinion. And the Panthers at the Jets have high upside, especially without Garrett Wilson playing. I don't trust Justin Fields. He is a bit turnover prone at times, and without those rushing stats in the fourth quarter, he is dog shit. I think the Panthers have had a good enough defense where they can really shut out the Jets. Their offense should be really predictable, and I think the Panthers are a defense you want. They're top 5 this week at New York. The Broncos also playing New York, this time in Denver against the Giants, and it's a rookie quarterback. You should trust Denver. They're good enough talent-wise where they should be in the lineup every week. So I'm going to trust them, even though Jaxson Dart and Scattaboo kind of scare me. They're also coming off extra rest. They could look good, but on the road, Dart had 3 turnovers against New Orleans 2 weeks ago. I think the Broncos will give him a lot of problems. I expect them to be bust-proof. The floor should be pretty high for Denver versus New York. The Bears versus New Orleans, that's always a matchup you like. Against Rattler, it should be fine. But sometimes the Saints actually look competent on offense. The Bears were terrible on defense to start the year. They looked pretty okay against Washington, but not amazing. The rain was also a factor. But it's New Orleans. I'm willing to trust the Saints as a good matchup. The position's a bit weird this week, and I think the Saints matchup is valuable enough to trust. At 6, I'll keep the Bears in my lineup, but I don't feel great about it. I'm already starting to kind of worry about these rankings, but the Packers should play well. They've really disappointed me, though. I thought they could be elite this year, and this will be kind of the last test where I'm willing to rank them top 10. If they shit the bed, then I'll move off of them, but they have good personnel. They should play well. Kyler doesn't scare me, and Harrison's not 100%. Their run game is weird. Packers should dominate on the road at Arizona, but it's a road game. Sometimes the young team just doesn't know how to close them out. It could turn ugly, but the Packers should have a good floor. They have let me down, though. I've ranked them too high. I will acknowledge I've had some bad calls on the Packers. As must starts, they've been pretty mediocre at times. Number 8, though, I think we're dropping down a tier, and some of these defenses are just too talented to not start. So Rams and Jags, I think that's a weird low-scoring game in London. It could be a shootout, but at the same time, I think it's probably not. I like their defenses so far, but they do have a bye after this. If you picked up the Browns, I would understand dropping them to start Cleveland instead. But odds are you'll just roll with them. This game is probably a pretty low score. The Jags not dealing with Puka is a bit of a gift. And then the Rams have had such a good run defense. I will start both of them in the top 10, but more so high floor plays than high ceiling plays. And then the Seahawks versus Houston, I do not trust CJ Stroud. That Texans offense is pretty brutal. Their offensive line will get exploited. Seahawks should be a safe play at home versus Houston. Number 11, I think I ranked the Steelers too high. They did not get a turnover against Cincinnati, but they did have some good name value coming into this week, and I did want to respect them a little bit, but I did pick them to lose this game. I did kind of see it coming. I was reluctant to rank them this high, but at number 11, it's probably lower than most people had them. I think most of the consensus opinion was that the Steelers would crush on defense against Joe Flacco. I feel like most people probably started them with more confidence than I did, but 11, I did not tell you to bench them entirely. I was still relatively okay starting Pittsburgh in fantasy. At 12, though, I think these are the last 4 I'm really willing to consider. And some of them are fucking gross. But the Texans at Seattle should play well off the bye. I think they could limit JSN enough. They're also really good against the run. So I see a low score. I see like a 23-20 battle. And I do prefer Seattle, but Houston also in the mix here in the top 12. You could do much worse. They are really talented at the end of the day. But the Dolphins get the bad weather. It's not like Dylan Gabriel scares you, but Quinshon Judkins, Jerome Ford, and Dylan Sampson could have a really good game on the ground. Dolphins are so bad in the run defensive department that could be their Achilles heel, where the weather is a non-factor. Dolphins don't feel safe enough. They are so bad on defense. At 13, you got to be desperate, but the weather's a really big bump. That is for sure a reason why I'd be at least willing to consider them at 13. Number 14, the Jets versus Carolina. Maybe you don't want to go against Rico Dowdle, but they did step up against Denver, and we were optimistic about their personnel entering the year. So maybe they figured things out. At home, they could play well, but against the Panthers, it's just because it's Bryce Young. That's the only reason why I'd consider them at all. But the Giants at Denver get extra rest. They could be sneaky here. It's not like Bo Nix has looked amazing. The Jets just shut him down. So it could be another rough game against another New York team. But at home, I think Sean Payton's offense will play better. The Giants did look good, though, against Philly. Their defense has some good options, especially in the pass rush. They can be deadly. So at 15, you could do way worse. And if you're in a crowded, competitive league and you're super desperate, I do understand rolling out the Giants at Denver. You could make some worse decisions. In my opinion, they will offer like a 5-point floor if I had to guess. Beyond this point, I'm benching everyone, but the Titans get some bad weather, so maybe that helps them. But against Vrabel in the revenge game, I think I'm going to pass. Drake May looks good. Falcons and Vikings defense, though, is really talented, and I do think they have starting value rest of season. But their matchups are tough. The Niners on the road for Atlanta, not going to push it. And then the Eagles probably bounce back on offense after 2 straight losses with extra prep time. So Vikings could be good, but not dying to force it. Falcons and Vikings, way more talented than this generally. They will be top 12. 19, the Cardinals versus Green Bay. Packers offense hasn't quite clicked, so it doesn't scare me that much. And then the Bengals probably should have been ranked lower, but Pittsburgh offense doesn't scare me that much either. But beyond the top 20, definitely not going to push it with these guys. The Saints against Ben Johnson's defense, no thanks. The Colts and Charger game, I think, is a shootout. I am going to the game, so I'm hopefully optimistic for that. I think the Colts win. That's my tiebreaker, but don't want to start either of them in a big shootout. And then the Eagles, I think, surrender a lot of points to the Vikings, so not going to trust them with all their injuries. Don't feel like a safe play at all. The Bucs-Lions game is a huge shootout. I'm not testing Baker or Goff in the Dome, so fuck that. And then the Niners are so injured, so depleted against the Falcons and Bijan. No fucking chance. But the Cowboys-Commanders game is probably the biggest shootout of the week. So I'll bench both of them. And then the Raiders are going to get completely demolished. The Chiefs probably put on a clinic. Raiders are the worst start of the week. So that's it for this video. These are my top 22 players at all three positions this week. And I feel pretty confident in the top 6 quarterbacks. I would 100% endorse Jayden Daniels and Mahomes. Those two guys will be so elite, it's not even a joke. And then Prescott, Mayfield are vying for the MVP. They will step up in some big shootout games. I'm still going to trust them. Dak gets Lamb back. Mayfield, I think, gets Evans back, but might be losing Egbuka, so kind of a wash. Hurts, always a high floor, hard to fade him, but needs to contribute in the run department to have any value this week. I don't like his passing stats. Not high upside against the Vikings, so a bit lower in the ranks given Lamar and Allen are on bye. But Jared Goff has elite upside anytime he plays at home. And against Tampa Bay, it's going to be a shootout, so should probably throw for at least 3 touchdowns. I think Goff is a must start. But Caleb, Justin Herbert, Daniel Jones, and Drake Maye in the top 10, I would be starting them. They've been good enough this year where I totally trust them. Caleb gets a good matchup, but loses DJ Moore probably. Herbert and Daniel Jones likely in a shootout, but could get vultured on the ground. At least Daniel Jones probably will. Herbert, the matchup is a downgrade on paper, but should pass it at a high rate. And then Drake Maye, sadly, gets a tough matchup and a lot of wind. I could see the Pats offense kind of sputter a little bit. It's a better matchup on the ground than through the air. Carson Wentz, though, is my favorite streamer in this next tier, and I have him above Love, Purdy, and Mac Jones, the Niners starter at 13, and Michael Penix and Bo Nix, I think, have the safest floors otherwise outside the top 10. But Wentz, I think, has the highest upside. The Eagles' defense is really banged up. I like his ceiling this week. Love has a good floor every matchup, but sometimes leaves a lot to be desired. Bad matchup for the Niners quarterback, but I trust Shanahan. And then Penix in the same game probably keeps it close and competitive. Bo Nix has been up and down, but the floor is probably good for about 16, 17 points, most likely. Matchup is terrible, though, for Darnold and Jaxson Dart, so they're beyond the top 15. I would bench them in a 1-quarterback league. And then Flacco did outperform this rank, but I did upgrade him in the top 20. I did tell you to start him in a Superflex league. Stafford and Lawrence, though, that's a weird game. I think I'll pass. And then Bryce Young gets a good matchup but doesn't capitalize. I didn't trust Rodgers to capitalize either, but he did with 4 touchdowns. At tight end, McBride and Kraft get elite matchups, top 5 on the slate, so got to start them. They're amazing. Warren and Goedert have earned must-start status, so they're in the top 4. And then with Bowers and Kittle coming back from injury, I didn't rank them top 3, but at 5 and 6, if you've been waiting this long, you're probably going to start them no matter what. But the matchup for both is bottom 10, especially Kittle. That's a rough spot versus the Falcons. Laporta, Kelce, and Ferguson have earned top 10 status, so going to keep starting them as well. But in the top 16, a big streaming tier, my preference is Dalton Schultz. I love his matchup. I love the volume headed his way. I think the floor is bust-proof for him. Otton has good touchdown odds, but with Evans coming back, maybe less volume going for Otton than Schultz. Ertz has touchdown upside against Dallas. It's always a good matchup, but Terry comes back, not the most ideal. And then Hunter Henry at 13. The wind and weather could be a problem, but I did bump up Mason Taylor in this part of the video. I ranked him 21 earlier in the vid, but I do think his matchup is so good. I think he's a better start than Evan Engram. I do have Mason Taylor at 14 now. Carolina is a top 3 matchup, but Engram, Kyle Pitts, and Tyler Higbee have a decent floor this week, especially Higbee's interesting given Puka is out, but Engram and Pitts probably get 6 targets apiece and should have some decent yardage. I think 6 or 7 points is a decent projection for all of these tight ends. 10 through 17, I think, are good streaming options this week. But Fannin and Waller get really rough weather. I'll bench them despite some trust. Historically, Fant and Jonnu didn't rank high enough, but did have in an interesting tier. And then lastly, Theo Johnson at 22. Just need a touchdown, but interesting as a backup rest of season. Lastly, the defensive position is really safe in the top 3. The Chiefs, Browns, and Pats are all locks in the lineup. But the Panthers against the Jets have high upside. The Broncos always a high floor. The Bears against the Saints, a good matchup to chase. And then the Packers might be letting me down too much, but still going to rely on them just one more time in the top 7. I think they'll play well against Arizona. Then the Rams, Jags, Seahawks, and Steelers are all talented enough to still start, but on the lower side of the spectrum here. And then the Texans I may have ranked a bit too low, but Dolphins, Jets, and Giants have interesting matchups. They're the last ones I would consider. And then in the top 20, Titans, Falcons, Vikings, Cardinals, Bengals have interesting arguments to be made for them, but ultimately a rough matchup that has me concerned. I would bench them if I can. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And I will see you next time. My name is Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.